Have you ever wondered why some of the world's most innovative tech companies just flat out refuse to fire their worst performing employees?
Right. Well, traditional companies, they jump at the very first chance to lay them off.
Exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are getting into a really fascinating discussion today, looking at some sources that blend a very old business parable with modern corporate philosophy.
Yeah, it's a great mix because, it sounds completely backwards when you first hear about keeping failing workers. We're all culturally conditioned to view business as this ruthless efficiency machine.
For sure. The standard logic is always, you have to prune the dead branches to save the tree.
Right. You cut the bottom 5% of your workforce, and suddenly you save a massive amount on the quarterly budget.
And supposedly, everyone who survives the layoff is motivated to work twice as hard out of fear, right? It looks decisive.
Yeah, it pleases the shareholders. It feels like active management.
Yeah.
But our mission today is to completely rewire how you view a cost versus an asset.
And oddly enough, this entire paradigm shift starts with what a bowl of soup can teach us about surviving corporate failures. But before we get to the soup, we need to look at a simple story from our sources to really nail down this abstract concept of preventive costs.
Oh, the parable of the landlord. This is such a perfect illustration of the psychology here. So let's look at Mr. Chen and Wang Lawu.
Right, so Mr. Chen is this highly successful, wealthy landlord. He owns a sprawling network of properties, countless tenants, and his ledger is just always full.
Yeah, he has all this physical capital at risk. So he hires a man named Wang Lawu to be his dedicated watchman.
Right, Wang's only professional responsibility is to guard these houses and make absolutely sure they do not catch on fire.
Exactly. He is there to prevent a specific disaster. And for a long period, the arrangement works flawlessly. Like there are no fires at all.
The properties are totally secure, but that state of peace is exactly where this massive psychological trap springs shut on Mr. Chen.
Because when you look at a ledger, prevention is entirely invisible.
Right? Yes. Mr. Chen just sees the steady stream of money leaving his accounts to pay Wang's salary every single month, but he can't physically see the disasters that aren't happening.
To him, the absence of a fire just looks like good weather.
It's the classic cybersecurity dilemma we see today. Like, if the IT department does its job perfectly and the company never gets hacked, executive management inevitably looks at the budget and goes, why are we spending millions on a cybersecurity team?
Right, they say, we never have any breaches.
Exactly. So, falling into this exact trap, Mr. Chen fires Wang Lawu to optimize his expenses.
And the predictable outcome follows pretty shortly after. Because without Wang patrolling the grounds, enforcing the rules, keeping an eye on things, the whole environment changes.
Yeah, the tenants don't actually own the properties, so they don't share Mr. Chen's financial risk. They start getting a little careless with their cooking fires and their lanterns.
And a fire breaks out.
And the devastation is massive. Fortunately, our sources note nobody is hurt, but the physical damage to the properties is catastrophic.
Yeah, the capital required to rebuild completely dwarfs whatever tiny marginal salary Mr. Chen saved by firing his watchman.
He learns the hard way that the absence of a disaster is, rarely just luck. It's almost always the result of unseen, deliberate work.
So Mr. Chen realizes his error, obviously, and he rehires Wang Lawu. But this is the crucial turning point in the story.
Right, because Wang fundamentally changes his perspective on his own value. He realizes that just walking around looking for smoke isn't a sustainable career.
No. If he remains just a passive observer, he's always going to be viewed as a replaceable sunk cost the next time the ledger gets tight.
He totally refuses to just be a human fire alarm. And I love this part. He steps into a role that looks remarkably like a modern project manager using the PDCA method.
Yeah, plan, do, check, act. Instead of just reacting to sparks, he builds a whole system.
Walk us through how he actually does that, practically speaking.
Well, in the plan phase, Wang assesses the specific vulnerabilities of the tenant culture. Then for the do phase, he institutes standard operating procedures.
Right. He actively trains the tenants. He implements fire safety awareness education.
Exactly. So every single person living there becomes a node in his prevention network. He effectively crowdsources the vigilance.
He essentially invents the modern fire drill for a 19th century housing complex. And he takes it even further, right?
He does. As Mr. Chen recovers and starts expanding his empire, building new houses, Wang steps in during the architectural phase.
Oh, wow. So he's advising on spatial layout, building materials, integrating fire safety directly into the blueprint.
That is the exact mechanism of moving from a cost center to a value center. He's no longer just mitigating downside risk. He is actively engineering a more resilient business model from the ground up.
But, building a robust system to prevent physical fires in a housing complex is relatively straightforward compared to preventing stagnation in a modern tech company.
Oh, absolutely. When you're dealing with a knowledge economy, the disaster isn't a burning building. The disaster is market irrelevance.
Right. So, how do you apply Wang's proactive structural mindset when the risk you're trying to manage is, say, a failed multi-million dollar tech innovation?
Well, that requires a massive leap in organizational philosophy. And that brings us directly to the approach taken by Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang.
Yes, the thick soup philosophy.
Exactly. And it completely challenges the entire premise of traditional corporate efficiency.
Because the standard Wall Street playbook is practically a reflex at this point. A quarter looks weak, a product launch stumbles, and the immediate instinct is to look at the internal employee performance rankings and chop off the bottom 5%.
It provides this immediate, highly visible relief to the payroll. It's the exact same psychological trap Mr. Chen fell into.
It looks like you're eliminating a useless expense.
But Huang argues vehemently against this practice. Now, with one very specific caveat that our sources make clear.
Right, let's clarify that. If an employee is demonstrating moral failings, crossing ethical lines, having a severe attitude problem.
Yeah, actively cultivating a toxic environment. If that's happening, they are removed immediately.
So if someone is embezzling funds or intentionally sabotaging teammates, they're fired. We are not talking about ethical breaches here.
No, we are talking strictly about employees who are putting in the effort, but whose performance metrics and project outcomes place them at the very bottom of the ranking.
Right. And Huang's philosophy suggests that if you constantly filter out your bottom performers, relentlessly pursuing only top-tier, flawless achievers, your company becomes this clear, pure broth.
It looks perfect, but it's ultimately bland. He says a highly innovative company needs to be a rich, diverse, complex, thick stew.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this for a second. If I'm managing a struggling division, keeping an employee whose projects keep failing seems incredibly dangerous for my bottom line.
Sure, it feels that way.
Are we saying companies should just actively reward failure? I mean, why would I want someone in my kitchen who keeps burning the meals?
Because you have to analyze why those specific people are in the bottom 5%. In a company pushing the boundaries of tech, those bottom performers are rarely just lazy.
Interesting. So who are they?
They are usually the engineers and designers who took massive, unprecedented risks. They tried to build something entirely new, they tested a radical hypothesis, and, well, reality or the market proved them wrong.
They failed precisely because they were doing exactly what an innovative company needs its people to do.
Exactly. Their failure is a byproduct of their courage.
Wow. Okay, now think about the psychological ripple effect of firing them.
Oh, it's devastating.
If you lay off the people who took a swing and missed, you're sending a chilling, undeniable message to the remaining 95% of your workforce.
You're telling them in no uncertain terms, do not take risks. Play it safe. Protect your performance metrics at all costs.
You're systematically terrifying your own workforce into mediocrity. If everyone knows that a failed experiment equals a pink slip, the only ideas getting pitched are the safe, boring, incremental ones.
Which guarantees the creation of that bland, clear broth. You extinguish the courage of the entire organization.
And Huang's perspective recognizes that by keeping these failing employees, giving them the space to analyze their mistakes, they gain something the flawless top performers just don't have.
They possess the visceral, hard-won experience of a catastrophic failure. They know exactly where the hidden landmines are buried in the development process.
They effectively become Wang Laowu after the property is burned down. Because they live through the system breaking, they are the single most qualified people to architect the fireproof systems of the future.
Retaining that institutional knowledge of what does not work is an invaluable asset. But, a macro-level philosophy from a CEO is completely useless if the micro-level dynamics of the individual teams don't support it.
Right. You have to understand how retaining these messy, diverse, sometimes failing voices actually functions on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room.
It's one thing for the CEO to declare the company a thick stew. It's an entirely different reality for a middle manager trying to hit a deadline while dealing with a team member who just botched a major deliverable.
And this is where the sources bring up the danger of the echo chamber. This is so critical.
Yes, the echo chamber is the natural enemy of the thick soup. It happens when a leader only retains people who blindly follow orders and nod along to every proposal.
If you're a leader and your team never pushes back, you are just paying for compliance. You aren't paying for actual value or critical thought.
Exactly.
It sounds like having a team of yes men feels fantastic for a manager's ego, but it acts like a massive blind spot for the company. You're basically paying people to hide the iceberg from the captain.
I love that analogy. Everyone on the deck sees it coming, but nobody wants to risk ruining the captain's good mood by pointing it out.
So how does a healthy team avoid that?
Well, a highly functional project team actually requires structural friction. You need the R&D department wanting to push the technological limits, colliding with the manufacturing team who demands efficiency.
Right, and they're both colliding with the marketing team who needs a compelling narrative.
Exactly. If they all agree instantly, someone isn't doing their job. As long as they share the same overarching goal and they aren't cutting ethical corners, that collision is where actual market-defining innovation gets forged.
So the friction isn't a bug in the system, it is the system. Leaders should encourage pushback.
They have to. If team members are withholding dissenting opinions, it doesn't mean the manager's ideas are flawless. It means the team has stopped thinking critically.
And when a team stops thinking critically, an incredibly dangerous shift happens. The manager is suddenly left bearing the entire weight of all unseen project risks alone.
Imagine an engineer who spots a thermal flaw in a microchip design. But because the culture punishes dissent, they stay quiet to avoid being labeled difficult.
Oh man, the chip goes into production, it fails in the market, the company loses hundreds of millions, and the manager is completely blindsided.
All because they wanted a quiet, agreeable room. Retaining the thick stew ingredients, the complex, pushy people who might have a history of messy failures, is fundamentally a risk mitigation strategy.
It feels riskier in the moment because the meetings are louder and more combative, but it is vastly safer for the long-term survival of the product line.
You're paying salaries to acquire their critical friction, not their obedience.
Okay, so we've looked at this dynamic heavily from the perspective of the employer and leadership, but let's pivot. What is the practical application for the individual employee?
This is a really important shift in perspective.
Like if you are listening to this right now and you recently spearheaded a project that completely fell apart, placing you solidly in that bottom 5%, what is your next move?
Well, it's a deeply vulnerable position, and the instinct to hide is strong. But our sources are very clear. You cannot just wallow in self-pity or feel useless.
So it's not just about the company having the grace to keep you. The burden is on the employee to prove their failure wasn't a waste. But how does an employee actually prove to a potentially conservative boss that their failure is valuable nutrition and not just a giant mess?
That's the key term right there. Nutrition. You have to metabolize the failure. Think about how a body digests food. It ruthlessly breaks it down to extract the useful components.
Okay, so how do I do that with a failed project?
You don't just say, I messed up. You conduct a rigorous postmortem. You isolate the variables. You document the precise point where the hypothesis broke down against reality.
Oh, I see.
Then you present that documentation to management, not as an apology, but as a structural stress test. You say, here is the invisible flaw we uncovered, and here is how this data saves our next launch from the exact same fate.
You prove that the company's investment in your failure actually purchased a map of the minefield.
Precisely. But, and this is a massive but, that only works if the company is actually willing to look at the map.
Right. Which leads to another critical point for the individual. You have to evaluate your own company's culture. Are you operating within a genuine learning organization that supports that thick soup environment?
Because if you're working under a highly conservative, traditional manager whose entire career survival is driven purely by short-term KPIs,
your meticulously documented, valuable nutrition is just going to look like a red stain on their ledger.
Exactly. If you're a bold, complex ingredient, but you realize the kitchen you're standing in only values clear, predictable broth, you're eventually going to be thrown out.
And it won't be because your skills are lacking. It'll just be a fundamental mismatch of risk tolerance. You have to figure out if your environment actually allows you to exercise your unique strength.
If you're in the right environment, a catastrophic failure isn't the end of your career trajectory. It's the raw material for your future expertise.
Which really brings this whole deep dive full circle. We journeyed from a landlord's fire prevention parable in the 19th century to the high-stakes world of modern tech innovation.
And the core takeaway across all these sources is a strategic shift. We have to stop looking at preventive departments and failed innovations purely as cost centers.
Right. When managed with intention, they aren't dragging down the bottom line. You can transform them into value centers and actual engines for future growth.
The friction, whether it's the monthly cost of paying a watchman when there is no fire or the painful sting of a multi-million-dollar project collapsing, is simply the price of admission for long-term survival.
So whether you are managing a massive project or just evaluating your own recent setbacks, you have a choice. You can cut your losses, silence the dissent, and strive for a safe, predictable, bland broth.
Or you can embrace the messy, diverse, deeply human ingredients required to make a rich, innovative, thick soup. It takes courage, but it builds an organization that actually learns.
It definitely changes how you look at the people sitting across from you in your next project meeting. But before we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Building on everything we've discussed today,
Exactly. If failure is truly an essential metabolized ingredient in the thick soup of corporate innovation, should companies actually go a step further and set aside a specific failure budget for their teams to burn through each year?
that's a fascinating concept.
And at what point does intentionally adding too many risky ingredients cause the entire soup to boil over entirely? Something to think about the next time you hesitate to pitch a wild idea. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.